Good day and welcome to our newest episode of BalCanis podcast. Today we are going to be talking about study permits, do's and don'ts, what to do and what not to do. And for you, we will be receiving today Janssen, a lawyer that we have already received in an episode of BalCanis podcast. It was a French one. He's a bilingual, brilliant lawyer. We will discuss with him. He's going to tell us what to do, what not to do. And remember, this is BalCanis podcast. The goal here is to help you with your study permit application that you can do on your own, or why not retain our services to help you with if you so desire. So without further ado, I will go ahead and welcome Lou. How are you doing today? Welcome.
I'm very good. Thank you, Eddie, for that wonderful introduction. I'm flattered. And honestly, I'm very happy to be back with you. And as I was saying off camera, I'm very grateful for essentially providing me a forum to talk about the things that we do in our practice, especially when lawyers and consultants work together when it comes to these matters.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we do and try to help the public, especially the ones that are not very sure what to do, how to do about it, where to get the information, because people are out there giving out false information, misleading people, and we want to try and protect as many as we can by giving out the right information, where to go and find the information that is required. So, as we said, today we are talking about study permit applications. So you have done so many of them, Lou. My first question will be, what are the common mistakes that you have come to notice on when people are applying for study permit, or stuff that you have seen yourself during your practice? So let's start with that, and then we will gradually try to provide tips and tricks, solutions kind of to what people can do to avoid those mistakes. And this is the goal of today's podcast. So go ahead.
I'm going to try to keep it simple. I've basically outlined several points. The first one I really want to underscore, which I think is the most important point, is insufficient documentation. So don't do that. Okay. When you submit and prepare an application and submit it to immigration, make sure that you're actually following the checklist provided by immigration. When you're preparing it online, for example, there's a checklist that is available using your GC Key account or through the TR portal. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, do not forget that a checklist actually exists for which office you're applying to. So for example, if you're from Algeria, mm-hmm. the office checklist in Paris would be the one that you would be looking at. Mm-hmm. Or if you're in Singapore, obviously you'll be looking at the Singapore office checklist. And I noticed that through the course of the years that not just people who do it themselves or people who DIY this, as you said, yeah. But also consultants and some lawyers mm-hmm. actually don't even know that these lists exist. So insufficient documentation for applications is a very big problem. And one thing to keep in mind is that one office is going to have a different list from one to the other. In other words, the Abu Dhabi office will have a different set of requirements compared to, say, for example, Bangkok or Manila. So be very, very careful about these requirements and do pay attention to that.
All right. So
a lot of times, yeah, go ahead, Eddie.
No, I was going to just mention reiterate what you're saying. You're talking about the country-specific requirements. So we should, all of us, pay attention to those country-specific on top of what is usually required for everyone. So go specifically based on your country of origin or residence. Get that country-specific checklist and follow along.
Absolutely. Okay. It's very critical, especially since you want to maximize the chances that you are going to get an approval. And in order to do that, you need to meet the bare minimum set by that particular office. Now, I want to emphasize one final point on sufficiency of documents. Is that keep in mind that you as the applicant have the burden of proof to actually establish to the officer that you are what you claim to be, that you are a genuine international student seeking a study permit in Canada. And this allows me to actually move on to the next point that I want to highlight as a don't. Not stating your true intentions when you come to Canada as a student, or stating it in a very vague manner. What I'm trying to say here is that when you submit an application for a study permit, make sure that your study plan or statement of purpose is very clear. There is one interesting psychology study, Eddie, that I came across a couple of months ago. Turns out that the human attention span is about 12 seconds these days. It really depends. Obviously there will be variables, but on average, it's looking like anywhere between 8 to 12 seconds. So if you think at that poor visa office in a particular office who would have to look at applications over and over and over again every day for the entire week, you'll want to make sure that you get your point across in the first 8 seconds, that basically you make your point right away on your first page. I even spoke to one former immigration agent, and she's of the position that in fact, your study plan should be no longer than 1 or 2 pages, quite frankly. So not stating your genuine intentions, your intent to study, and not providing a coherent plan is not a good idea. So don't do that.
So I got questions with that, Lou. So coming back to documents, are we to provide more documents or only stay specific to what has been required or asked? Now, is it okay for us to provide more or just stick to whatever is on the list? What is your advice on that?
That's a very good question, and it's very fact-specific and case-specific. I would say this. At the very least, meet the minimum requirements of the visa office, the country-specific checklist. Then on top of that, use good judgment whether you think extra documentation is necessary. For example, if you're over 30 and if you're changing careers and obviously you don't fall in the what's deemed as a normal path of life, in French we say parcours, right? If you're not in that normal pathway, you'll need to make some explanations. So in other words, in those situations, I would say documentation is key and necessary in order to be able to justify what you're trying to do or what you're trying to apply for. However, one final warning about this: be very selective and be very careful about what you include so that you don't overburden the officer with too much information. But at the same time, you want to strike that balance of having enough information there so that if you're still refused because, let's say, things don't go in your favor, as we know, Chinook kind of like serves as a processing shortcut for a lot of officers. In those situations, I would say be prepared with a full record so that when you launch, let's say, a request for reconsideration or even a judicial review or a reapplication, you'll have something to rely on.
All right. So what you're saying is actually submitting an application and keeping in mind that possibility, but at the same time, we have that problem. We know that officers don't have much time to take a look at that document. But what you are saying actually is on our part as consultant, lawyers, practitioners, or applicants, we should think about the next step ahead of time. All right.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, absolutely. And in fact, as a final point on that, I would say, you'll have a complete record, but I would always include a one-page summary on top of the application so that the officer has one place to go so that they understand it on first glance. Remember that 8-second rule. And that's kind of like what we live by in this firm. For example, if we prepare a study permit application or an application for a TRV, the officer needs to be able to understand by just looking at it very quickly, needs to understand what it is that you're asking for, why you're asking for it, and needs to be able to be justified within those 8 seconds. It's a very tough ask. and it's more of an art than a science, right? So there's no straightforward answer, unfortunately, but you have to strike that balance.
All right. So coming back to the study plan, you said we should state the intentions clearly, but how often do we have to repeat ourselves or state it on the submission letter or on the study plan? How should we best go about it?
So a few tips, I would say. There is this thing in legal writing that we learn in law school.
Okay.
It's called point first writing. So what you want to do is you state your point or your thesis at the very beginning, and then you explain it thereafter. Okay. Because at the end of the day, the officer doesn't have a lot of time to look at your application. So you're doing them a favor by stating your point in a very clear and logical manner, and then make your explanations afterwards. But be very careful when you do those explanations. You have to be coherent. You have to be short. And two pieces of advice that I would have is, number one, keep your words simple. Grade 10 English.
All right.
And number two, short sentences and short paragraphs. Those are very helpful, because if you're dealing with a lot of information as a visa officer, you'd be very appreciative of a file that comes to you and you see it. Oh, it's simple. It's clear. I understand it in the first 5 seconds or 8 seconds. I got it. You got their attention. Do you know what I mean?
I see. I understand. So now, about the actual content of the study plan, what would you recommend one to have laid out on the study plan for it to be effective? Short, sweet, and effective.
That's a very good question and point. Unfortunately, again, there's no, one size fits all answer to that question. It's very fact specific, but what I tend to do is I sit down with my client and ask them, I interview them like in a very detailed manner. What is it that they want to do? What is this program that they're trying to pursue? And how does it kind of like come together with their life plans and their life goals? What is it that they hope to achieve by studying in Canada? And then we try to help our clients formulate that study plan. And in the process of formulation, the first draft is never your final draft, obviously. You try to condense that. You try to make sure that you don't lose your client's voice, but at the same time, you want to make sure that the sentences and the paragraphs are efficient, and that more importantly, the study plan is point first. As regards to the content, again, that's going to have to be determined by your client.
Exactly. All right. So I've heard about other people, not only practitioners, but also other applicants who retain services of writers, professional writers, to have the study plan written for them. What do you think about that?
That's a very interesting question, Eddie. And I've taken the position that for my clients anyway, that they should be writing their own statements. It has to be their voice, number one, because at the end of the day, there is no person in the world who can state what their intentions are better than the client themselves.
Absolutely.
Right. And it also brings about a second question, because as you know, the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, the law that governs immigration in Canada, specifically provides that only authorized representatives are supposed to provide services to, applicants for a fee.
Exactly.
And there are penalties that are associated with that.
Absolutely.
And in effect, if you are using a ghost representative, you may be in violation of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. So I would put a caution on potentially problems that may arise from hiring the services of such representatives who are not authorized.
Absolutely.
But if it's a lawyer and a consultant helping you to construct your study plan, that's totally fine, because they're actually authorized by the Act, right?
So you heard, don't do that. This is actually don't. No.
Yes.
Don't do that. All right. Thank you very much. That is very clear answer. We understand, and our applicants or our candidates who chooses to submit the application on themselves. So, please do not go ahead and try to find professional writers to help you with that. You can lay out your own ideas. If you need assistance, please go and see an authorized representative, an immigration consultant, a lawyer, or notary public in Quebec. All right. So another key area you want to talk about on the don'ts, anything else that we should not do when submitting an application or preparing an application for study permit, Lou?
One thing that comes to mind as a final point would be, don't lie. And I think this is a very important point.
It's key, absolutely.
It's interesting because I think it's supposed to be something that goes without saying, but a lot of times I find myself when I'm in consultations or even with my own clients, we need to be honest. We need to remind them that we need to be honest with your work history, with your education history. It's not worth your time to actually risk a misrepresentation finding, especially since now that IRCC and the CBSA are, it's not really an Easter egg hunt for them, but rather because of the convergence of technology, because of the tools that they have, they are in a position to flag more misrepresentations than before. You see those forms that are no longer handwritten, that are electronic. It's easier for them to catch inconsistencies in your files. So don't lie. Just be truthful, be honest. One last tip in that regard, on that point, I would say keep a master file of your, let's say, personal history, your address history, and your CV. Have a living CV. Maybe that's your LinkedIn profile, right? So that you don't forget every single aspect of anything that you've disclosed to immigration and to CBSA.
Okay. All right. So that is very important, because sometimes what people do or what they say is that they don't remember some information about travel history or about other activities. And when that information is not provided, it could be considered as misrepresentation, because you're not providing the information. And if by a fact you had provided that information in another previous application and now you are not providing it, then the inconsistency starts to come up and to rise.
No, totally. I agree with you. And having that master CV or a living resume in the form of your LinkedIn profile really helps. And keep in mind, Eddy, and I think you already know this, and to your viewers, keep in mind that immigration officers are free to check social media. And what you put on your LinkedIn profile will probably be compared to what you're putting in on your forms. And the challenge I find, and I hear from the consultations, the clients that I had, and if they've done their forms in the past themselves, is that, well, the form only has, let's say, 3 slots where I can put my work history. I obviously have more than that in the last 10 years. Sure. So that's where the extra slot of client information comes into play, right? You want to make sure that you have a comprehensive table of what you've been up to in the last 10 years.
So add a Word document, continue to provide that information. It needs to be captured. All right.
Absolutely.
So any tricks then that you have in mind? You have been working on this. You have a lot of experience. So what would you advise consultants, lawyers, and applicants not to do? Not to do, we already did. How to avoid these mistakes? What are the tricks that you have come up to know after all these years?
So, no, that's a really good question in terms of from a practice management perspective. So I'll speak with 2 points. One is to, practitioners such as lawyers and consultants, and the other would be to people who would file their applications themselves. Good. So let's start with the practitioners. Have a robust checklist that is internal to your firm. Have 3, 4 sets of eyes review applications before they go out.
Okay.
And I think Will Tao, my friend, and who's appeared on your show before, has mentioned this several times on Twitter, on several platforms that he had an opportunity to do so. Make sure that before you submit an application, to submit a full copy to your client,
Okay.
and make sure to get their consent, written consent, to submit this. Get them to review it. Sometimes we're all human. We'll miss something as practitioners, and sometimes your clients will be able to catch them. Is it embarrassing? Maybe, but then take a proactive approach that this is a collaborative effort. There's a lot of information, obviously, and it could be that things were misunderstood, things were misstated, and there's a final backstop before you submit things to immigration. So that's number one in terms of practice.
And before
get
you
that
move
checklist.
Before you move on that, I just want to add something. That's exactly what I do. And especially today with Zoom, I organize a meeting with the customer or the client on the other side. I share my screen. We go over each form. Please take a look, confirm, is this correct? Is this correct? At the end of all, he's sure that the overall file is exactly the way he wants it. Me, on my side too, I'm very confident. I am not putting information that the customer doesn't want or did not say or does not reflect what it's saying. So we submit it like that. So it's a very, very important thing that you just mentioned there. So I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No worries. It's a time-consuming step for sure, but it is very important and very crucial, because correcting those mistakes down the road, not good. It's going to be even more time-consuming. It might cost you a lot more money than you would think as a practitioner. Now, moving on to the side of the applicant, and I've seen this a lot of times for people who do it themselves. They don't keep a copy of what they submit to immigration themselves. They file it and forget about it until they get a decision, whether it's a positive one or a negative. If it's a negative, then they would go to Eddy, for example. They would go to Lou, and they will ask me, how do I fix this? Well, first of all, can I have a look at what you submitted? And then they're like, oh, what did I submit?
I don't have it.
That's not good. Exactly. And one thing that your viewers probably already know, but I'd like to mention it anyway, is that when you go back to your GC Key account, you're not able to download those things. You're going to be looking for files and you're not even sure which version of the file that you submitted. So make sure to have the proper final version saved somewhere. Email the entire package to yourself if you have to, right?
Absolutely. So about that, what if you come across somebody who has already filed a previous application and does not have the copies because they did not keep them? What should they do then now?
Depending on whether you have time or not. If you do, I would strongly suggest that you ATIP a copy of not just the GCMS notes, but also a copy of the entire file, including the correspondence to and from immigration to the applicant or the previous representative. If that person actually had a previous representative, you might have better luck of getting that file quickly than through an ATIP request, right? They are obliged, according to the professional rules of conduct for consultants and for lawyers, to transfer files if it is requested. You may get some resistance, but if you have problems, your new lawyer should be able to negotiate a way to actually get that file from the previous representative. But they do have that obligation to transfer the file. So those are the ways in order for your new lawyer to actually do a forensics analysis of your file. It's very important to understand what was filed on top of actually do the due diligence research or work on your file so that they don't accidentally step on a landmine when they're submitting a new application.
All right. That's very, very interesting to know. Okay, so another thing that they should know, another trick to avoid mistakes. What do you think our viewers should be thinking about. But before we go to the viewers, I want to come back a little bit to the practitioners, especially consultants, for example. We do not have a lot of manpower, not a big offices working with 3, 4, 5 people. Now, what would you advise to a consultant who works alone? Because you just recommended to have 2, 3 different sets of eyes to take a look before submitting. And somebody will be listening to you and say, Lou, that's not realistic in my world. I can't do that. So what do you think? Well, what can you tell?
I want to say that, no, that's a really excellent point, Eddie. And I would say that for quite some time, I actually practiced on my own as well. I had no assistant. So I absolutely understand where that particular sentiment will come from. So that being said, I would say sleep on it. Okay. So I would say prepare the application file ahead of time so you can sleep on it. Then review it, try to find the issues. Look at the source document. So for example, if you're filling out form IMM 1294 in application for a study permit, is the passport information actually the correct information? So you may have had an intake form from where you lifted that information from and plugged it into the form. But I would recommend as a backstop as well to check the original documents.
All right. Go back to the
in
source.
My setup,
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The source documents are always the best place to go. But of course, we understand that we have our list, we have our process, depends from one office to the next. I would say have multiple screens open. I think this is very critical. It's becoming more common, but it's very important to have that multiple screen setup. So on the one hand, you have your forms on the left, for example, and on the right, you can actually open the source documents and you can compare, cross-reference the information. And again, sleep on it. I would say, those fresh pairs of eyes, that's very important when you're doing review after review after review. So back in the days when I was alone, I would not only do it twice, but I would do it 3 times, sometimes even 4.
Wow.
But, it really depends on how much time you give yourself with the final product, right?
Exactly. Okay, very interesting. Okay, so we got a trick there to add. If we are not doing that enough, maybe we should think about sleeping on it. I like that. Sleep on it, come back. So then it will require most of us to start preparing the files ahead of time. So you have enough time actually to work on it. Give it some time for you to rest, sleep on it, or work on a different file, then come back with fresh eyes. All right. Anything else you want to add?
Absolutely. For those who are doing it themselves, same principle.
Okay.
Finish your forms early, but then come back to it, maybe several days after. Same idea. It's just that when you sleep on certain things, if you review things, you'll be surprised. You'll find something. It's a common thing, right? When you're drafting, let's say, letters, when you've sent it, the minute you've sent it, you realize that you've made an error, a typographical error. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Oops, we're human. And no one is perfect. And the trick is to have, layers and layers of check so that you keep these errors to a minimum. And if you're in a situation where you did submit something that is a mistake, the best thing to do is, first of all, if you're the representative, is to alert your client. Right away.
Right away.
You need to put that in writing.
Okay.
Especially if it's something that you can still fix. You should alert your client, and then, especially in these circumstances, you should do a web form update. For example, if there's an error in your IMM 1294, you have the ability to actually substitute it by sending a new one and explain via web form that I'm the representative on this file. This is the application number, the UCI. The form that I submitted contains some clerical errors that we did not spot. Please replace that with this one that's attached to this web form.
All right. So doing so would not be considered as a misrepresentation or anything, because you are jumping ahead, correcting your own mistake ahead of time.
Absolutely. And it's very important that that's done before a decision is made, because when adjudicating misrepresentation, if it's an innocent misrepresentation or a mistake, it can still be misrepresentation. Absolutely. As you, Eddie, know.
Absolutely.
so long as it's what's called material misrepresentation, right?
Yeah.
So it's very important that you correct the record the minute you discover it.
Oh, wow. We are learning a lot today. I'm very, very pleased to have you here today. And I will just remind our viewers, if you are interested in retaining our services, Lou's Janssen services, please do not hesitate to contact him directly, or you can contact him through us. Ask for his contact. We will provide them to you. You want to talk to him, you want to deal with him directly, you are welcome to do so. And if you want to deal with BalCAN Immigration Services, so for your immigration file, study permit, work permit, anything you want, please do not hesitate to contact us. But just make sure that you are either doing it yourself, doing it correctly, or retaining services of authorized representatives. So thank you very much. And we will go on. Lou, anything else you want to add on the checklist of tricks for our viewers and listeners?
Okay, two things. And I think it applies to both representatives, consultants, and lawyers, and also to self-represented persons, those who DIY this, is that I think I mentioned this during the time when we were doing the don'ts, but it's a good idea to really have that one-page summary at the front of your application. Let's say in front of your explanation letter or your presentation letter or your, let's say the study plan or the council submissions.
Okay.
It basically serves as a one-page summary for an officer to understand it,
okay,
within that 8-second frame.
Okay.
This is this is something that is not done by everyone. They just go with a long, lawyerly submission that according to the regulations, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is those submissions are very important, but officers simply just don't have the time. So I encourage representatives to continue doing what they do that is good. But on top of it, I would say add that one-page summary at the front so that an officer can understand the file right away, because they don't have a lot of time.
So
6 minutes, Eddy, 6 minutes.
Yes. So I'll be honest with you, Lou, I don't do that summary. And I'm very interested into that. I would like to know, what would you put in that summary? So we said about 1 page, not more than that. So sure. It's consistent of everything that forms the file. Just put it onto that one pager to say, okay, here's my request. This is what I'm asking. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So in my case, there are different ways to do it, but in my case, what I do is for our clients, we have a table on the front page that talks about the client's date of birth, the UCI, the application number, if it's already available. The UCI is important if it's something that they already have, so that they can link the application quickly. The other things that you want to talk about in the context of a study permit application would be, how much funds do you have? How much does a program cost? And how are you going to fund the rest of your studies if it's more than 1 or 2 years, right? And then on top of it, they'll also want to talk about why you're applying for a study permit, right? So what is the theory of your case? What is your thesis that you want to put forward? But instead of a full study plan of let's say 2-3 pages, you need to be able to get the one-line distillation, the one-line summary. Exactly. That one line that actually captures everything. You want to make that summary, put it on that one page. Are there things you want to put in front of that application? And I want to put a sidebar here that technically travel history, the lack of it rather, should not form as a negative factor in any application, however, as the Federal Court of Canada has said. However, this is a crutch that immigration officers or visa officers use all the time. So we might as well just play with it and move with it. If your client has travel history, especially to countries that require a visa, then I would put that front and center. So I would enumerate in the order of priority the 5 ICE countries, or the migration 5. That would be the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Canada. If your client has traveled to any of these 5 countries, I would put it there. Visas that are valid. And then to other places that they've traveled to, the Schengen zone, for example, if they've traveled to Japan, Korea, any other countries that require a visa that would be more or less commensurate to the level of economic development of the the West, as we could call it. more or less to show that there is a pattern of travel, and there's a pattern of compliance with immigration rules around the world. So it's very important that you put that there. And finally, as a final point, I would also include the DLI and the program of study and the DLI number.
Okay, so in the opposite for that travel history, what if you have a customer who has never traveled before? Are you going to put that in the summary as well? No travel or no previous travel?
I would not even leave it blank. I would probably not even include it in the table. But if you do have travel, even to non-visa required countries, say you travel to a neighboring country where you don't need a visa, I would still include that there. There's still positive inference that can be, not a lot of weight, but there's still some weight to it.
Okay, interesting. All right. So we have the travel history and we have all the information and about the DLI as well. We'll put the number just to make sure that the officer has the summary in front of him. And so is it true then an officer can base the decision on that summary then?
We've talked about Chinook.
Yes.
What an officer really has in front of them at the third module of Chinook, as far as we know Chinook, that is that an officer can decide just by looking at it, even if they have access to the original files in GCMS. But if you think about an application that consists of 6 or maybe 100 pages or 200 pages, and this officer has 6 minutes to adjudicate a file, and let's just say that GCMS is very slow, what would be the crutch that this officer will use essentially? It's not GCMS, it's more likely going to be Chinook. So they would probably make that decision based on the summary. So it is in your best interest, both as a representative, either as a consultant or as a lawyer, or as a self-represented individual, to make your application perfect in those terms.
All right. So before we jump into Chinook and the new development, is there anything else you want to add on the tricks on the study permit? Okay, let's move on still. We have a lot to learn today.
One more point. Sorry, if you may want to add. Yeah. One more point on that is that you want to include Schedule 1 in your application for a study permit if you're coming in from a visa required country.
Yes.
Only because that form allows you to enumerate your travel history in the last 5 years. The form says, put your last 5 years. I would say go beyond the 5 years. Put 10 years, just to show that there is that historical track, especially if you travel to those migration 5 or 5 eyes countries, right? It's just that the forms will automatically feed that information directly into the right fields in the system.
Okay.
So it assists the officer.
Okay. So let me ask you another question before we jump in here. Would you recommend a customer or a client to make payment for the first semester or the first year before submitting the application, or it's because it's not legally required to do so, but is it something that you would consider as a do?
It's a due depending on the circumstances. I would say this, the important element there in that question is the ability to pay for studies and to fund yourself while you're in Canada. So let's say, for example, you have a budget of 30,000 Canadian dollars for 1 year, the first year, and you're coming in as an individual and you're studying outside Quebec. So the minimum requirement of available liquid funds would be 10,000 to fund yourself in Canada. That's the baseline minimum. And then on top of it, you need to be able to pay for your tuition. So in that situation, I would say, sure, pay for your first semester, pay for your full year.
Okay.
Not a problem, but it won't hurt you either if you pay a smaller deposit, let's say 1,500, and show that you do have that liquidity available to you once you actually get that approval for your study permit. Because I understand where a lot of people are coming from, especially in light of the fact that a lot of applications are being refused. So they don't want to put their money there at that DLI just yet because they're not sure. And sometimes withdrawing that money from the DLI not only takes a long time, but also costs money.
Exactly.
Right?
They're losing some yes.
Yeah, so totally understand where they're coming from. So use your best judgment, but all you really need to ask yourself is, will the officer think that I don't have enough money if I do this, right? So you just have to show them that you do.
All right, perfect. Okay, so anything else on the tricks, or we should jump on to the new development? All right, so let's go with the new development. We had talked about Chinook with Lou and with as well as with Will Tao. We have explained, they have explained the Chinook system, how immigration officers work with Chinook. So right now, today, I guess Lou has a new development. I follow them, they work. I follow what they do. So I know there is new development he's going to be sharing with us. I'm very, very excited to hear from him to let us know what has come up. How can we work along with Chinook? Because it seems like it is there to stay. So how do we work with it to make sure that we are doing the right things for our customers, viewer, listeners as well? If you want to go ahead and file your application yourself, it is very helpful for you to know what is going to be talking about. So please pay attention.
So in terms of new developments, in terms of tips and tricks, they have not changed. The things that we talked about just now, Eddie, still matter. Keep your application straight to the point, be brief, make sure that you're using the correct forms, make sure that you're maximizing the forms, and make sure that the officer can understand your file in the first 8 seconds that they look at your file, the first page, for example. So that's still valid. Mm-hmm. What we are seeing, however, is that we are currently at version 3 of Chinook. And we know this because of the more recent ATIP disclosures. Okay. When people ask for their GCMS notes, we'll see that there's actually a line there now that says that it's been processed by Chinook version 3.
Okay.
What does Chinook version 3 look like? Unfortunately, no one knows. So that's the unfortunate update. So I do have an update, but it's not much of an update. But what I can say is that it may be that the Chinook, the current version right now, is that version does not deviate that far from the older version. What we do know from the chatter, from other disclosures we've received from immigration, is that they want to migrate the Chinook system into the cloud. So it may very well be that the same modules are still there, except that they are no longer on Excel sheets, but rather on the cloud.
What difference would that make?
A lot of us. It means that they may have more space to actually put things instead of having one cell to actually make that critical decision. The other thing that we want to know, that we don't know, unfortunately, right now, is if the system still retains the officer's working notes. Because one of the things that they said that happens with the previous versions of Chinook, which was on Excel, is that because it's on Excel, they can't conserve the applicant's privacy. Therefore, at the end of each shift, an officer has to delete their working notes on Chinook. So does that mean, because it's migrated over to the cloud, does that mean that there's a functionality for the system to retain those officers' working notes?
We don't know.
That's something that we're trying to find out. We don't know yet. But once we find out, we'll let you know.
Exactly. We are here. We are here. All right. So Chinook is still out there. It's still working. And so we need to learn. And this is exactly what we have done today. And I really thank you, Lou. We have done this exercise to learn how to cope with Chinook, because it is there, how to manufacture, how to complete our application, to put it in a way that it is as complete as possible and presented in the way that it is in our favor, because that's what we want for ourselves and for our customers. All right. So I think we have come pretty much to the end of today's episode. If you want to add something else, Lou, you can go ahead. But before that, I really want to thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you for our all the information that you have shared. I'm sure that our viewers and listeners will benefit from it, and other consultants as well. Just to let you know, I'm part of a group, consultants. We formed a group. It's actually a WhatsApp group, but Francophone consultant. They watch all those episodes that we make every time, and they are really, really very appreciative of what they hear from you guys. So I want to thank you very much for your time. So if you want to add anything to conclude, go ahead.
Oh, merci infiniment. Thank you for inviting me again. It's always lovely to talk to you, Eddy. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going. I think you and I both know deep in our heart that this is an evolving subject, and it's very exciting. We're at the front lines of it.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Merci à vous tous qui nous avez suivis. Please do not hesitate. Again, I will put all the information down. If you would like to retain Lou's services, please feel free to contact him directly. His phone number, email address. You can visit his website that he can actually, you can provide information for the listeners who are listening on the podcast, so they won't be they won't have the opportunity to read. So please give out your phone number, the email address, so they can send you the emails.
Thank you, Eddy. You can reach us at info@LJD-law.ca. I would also say go to our website, www.ljd-law.ca, where you can do two things. Number one, you can send an inquiry form, or number two, directly book a consultation with us.
All right. And we are BalCAN Immigration Services. So we are reachable at info@balcanis.ca. You can visit our website, www.balcanis.ca. So we'll thank you very much for listening to us and viewing. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Spotify, and all that. You may please also subscribe to Lou's In Light podcast on YouTube. I strongly recommend you do so. So we are going to see you next time. Thank you very much. Take care.